Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Megaman-B Challenger from the Future. In the last part we started off the game, and now moving on to our next Robot Master, Komusoman, the only one of the 4 Robot Masters to start with whose name isn't translated, because the term Komuso in this case is relying to a very specific thing that only existed in Japanese history to begin with. The Komuso were a group of mendicant monks who existed during the Edo period that relied entirely on charity to survive. And they wore these straw baskets on their head to indicate the absence of a specific ego, apparently. With that said, this even kind of goes into the boss fight a little bit. Warriors also often disguised themselves as these monks because they were unhindered by travel restrictions. Also, you may have noticed it by now, but every stage in this game's music is unoriginal. It's ripped straight from the original Megaman&B and then just put into this game's sound font. Some of them honestly make the transition pretty well. Like, I like this version of, I think this is the Tengu Man theme from Megaman&B. Other songs don't get translated as gracefully. With that said, this stage is actually a little dangerous, because for one thing, there's landmines all over the place that are indicated by little lattice squares on one tile of a platform, and when you step on them, they slowly count down and then explode. The explosion does do decent damage from memory, but base can just ignore them outright. Where base really makes things dangerous in this stage is with the frog enemies that shoot out slime that goops you up just like the Grey Devil's attacks can. Because he doesn't really have a way in most cases to do damage to them while also easily avoiding the, goop? The bubbles, I guess? Because more often than not, the stages in this game, the rooms have pretty low ceilings, so you can't double jump over projectiles like that super consistently. Also, this mini-boss just kinda sucks. This is the big cannon. It's got 2 guns on it that fire lasers straight forward that you can jump over his base, but as Mega Man just kind of use the platforms around to get around it, but you can only damage it by firing in between the 2 cannons, which can be a surprisingly tight hitbox. With that said, its attack pattern's actually completely set. It starts firing in the center, then it fires on the bottom of the screen, then it moves up to the top again and fires from the top, then it moves to the bottom and fires from the bottom again, then it goes back to the middle. And then it teleports to the opposite side and then does the exact same pattern. So you're safe on the top of the screen for most of the attack pattern, but only base can really take advantage of that safe spot because of his double jump on top of being able to fire downwards. As Mega Man, this fight can be a little rough, even if you can do more damage at once. I think one of the biggest problems with the mini-bosses in this game is it feels like they maybe have a bit too much health, although, like the bosses themselves, the mini-bosses don't have invincibility frames, so you can just use your special weapons to do more damage, because every single one of the special weapons in this game can do a lot of damage very quickly. Bosses still have technically specific weaknesses, but the other special weapons will still generally do well enough, again, because of the lack of invincibility frames. Although, you may not want to spam them as much as you might want to internally, for reasons we'll get into starting in the next stage. Now, the base Cyclone, the weapon we got from Aircon Man. There's something I also forgot to mention about it last time. While yes, it goes in that wavy pattern and can do multiple hits to enemies because of that in some cases, you need to be careful if it hits a wall because you can't fire another one immediately. You can only have one of them on screen at a time. And if it hits a wall, it actively pauses for a second, so there's some cases where you might just want to use it in screens that go off-screen visually, so you can just potentially spam it if there's an enemy in front of you. Additionally, you aren't going to be able to use it on most mini-bosses because base can't fire special weapons in all 8 directions, only his main buster. Which was a limitation that was also in the original Mega Man base, but it didn't really matter as much there, in some cases, as it was in this game, admittedly. But the base Cyclone also has a very particularly useful ability, and it's one that you could technically use even if you replay the intro stage to grind for bolts. You might remember we've seen walls like this throughout the stages so far, blocking that life capsule there. The base Cyclone can actively destroy these, as long as you don't get it stuck in a corner. Also kind of weird, you actually on the pause screen can see every power-up from the start, even if you just can't select it, and there's also blocks on the side for any of the items you pick up from the shop. And I guess I might as well in the next stage go over the items you can get from the shop as base, because I don't buy too many of them, to be frank, because bolts in this game are surprisingly scarce. Unless the game just decides to say, no, they're not scarce anymore. It really is just RNG, and at times it's kind of cruel, other times it feels like it's being absurdly kind. It's kind of the problem with putting currencies like that behind entirely random chance. Also, I hate these ladybug enemies. They are surprisingly hardy, and dodging them as base is kind of hard to do, even with his double jump. Because again, a lot of this game screens, because they are always this aspect ratio barring Aircon Man stage, They're very cramped because they're trying to maybe do a twist or turn in them usually, and these ladybugs can take advantage of that cramped nature on top of their speed pretty easily. Also, I swear some of the icons in the background here are special weapon panels from other games, but I can't exactly back that up. It's particularly the one on the top left that looks like I'm thinking of like some of the asteroid-based ones. With that said, we're finally coming up on Komusoman himself, and his fight will make something apparent very quickly, and that's why his name in concept art was Doppler Man. Take the damage and run, base. Run! Oh god, thank god you can double jump in cases like that still. So, Komusoman, he's weak to the base Cyclone, and you're gonna get to see his attack pattern a lot despite the fact he doesn't have invincibility frames because he actively does have invincibility frames during a lot of his attack pattern. What he first starts off doing is sending out 2 clones of him that are completely invincible on top of the main body being invincible during part of this attack, and then they all go up to the top of the screen and fire dumb projectiles that you have to jump up to avoid. And then it goes to the opposite side and repeats. This is all he does, but he is invincible whenever he himself is moving, and the clones can also bounce off your Forte Cyclone. As you can see, if you get a base Cyclone right on top of him, it does a lot of damage because of the lack of invincibility frames. But if he bounces off, you're going to be waiting for a second. Not a hard boss inherently, but the small nature of the room can make dodging some of the clones kind of tough. Base at least has the double jump to get around it in some cases, but what you might want to do is just stay off to the side. But for beating him, we get the Doppler attack, which is honestly a really cool technique. Base splits up into 4 mini bases, and then you can just control him in all 8 directions, no problem. The longer you have it active, the more weapon energy it does drain, of course, but it can be useful in some platforming instances, and it's also the main weakness of our next Robot Master, Bulletman, or Dangan Man, if memory serves, in the Japanese text. Bulletman's stage isn't the worst contender for a first stage out of the main 4 Robot Masters. At least as base, because its main platforming gimmick is vertically moving platforms that go up and down, like that. There's a couple of other things down the line, but for the most part, base's double jump can really help in stages like this. Now, you may have noticed there, we just started the stage, but when I checked the pause menu, base Cyclone was still lacking the ammo from Komusoman's stage. Special weapons have their weapon energy drained no matter what in this game if you've used them, and that sticks between stages. Thankfully, weapon energy is common enough to find in stages on top of enemies dropping it, so it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely annoying. Especially considering, in the case of base Cyclone, it's just the most common boss weakness in the game. If memory serves, the shop does have a way to replenish weapon energy, so take advantage of that if you can. Also in this stage, we got these weird little trumpets that shoot out clouds, which you can use as platforms. They can be used as platforms, yes, but you need to actually make sure to remember to use them in some cases because they are required in some parts of the game. And now we're on to the mini-boss of this stage, which is just a giant bee that fires out a small spread shot and then goes to the opposite side of the screen. Doppler attack's also very useful in this because you can actively use it to destroy the projectiles without taking damage. It does, as you can see though, eat up a lot of ammo. Alright though, let's go over the items the game has in the shop for at least both characters and base in specific, because obviously they both are going to have exclusive items. But unlike Megaman and Base Original, you don't unlock more items in the shop the further into the game you get. Everything's available from the start, you just need to go grind the bolts for it. Starting off, you can buy an extra life for 200. You can get the exit part, which allows you to exit a stage that was already completed, which, again, useful for grinding. The energy balancer returns, which when you pick up weapon energy, that will automatically funnel the weapon energy to the item with, to the weapon with the lowest ammo remaining. There's the weapon charge, which is 300 bolts, by the way, which recharges all of your special weapon energy automatically at that specific point, which is absurdly expensive to do that. There's the energy saver, which, like in Megaman and Base, makes it so that special weapons use less energy, period. There's the Super Recover for 200, which allows your energy to be recovered by a larger amount than usual if you pick up a health pickup. There's the Item Presenter, which makes a party ball show up in one area of the stage, which, not too useful. That could just be more bolts, health, or weapon energy to begin with, and that's common enough in the stages. There's the Shock Guard, which protects you against spikes once, not that there's a lot of spikes in the game to really worry about to begin with, because most of them are ones you just slide under. I think that'd be most useful in Aircon Man stage now that I think about it. And there's the Super Armor for 300, which reduces the amount of damage you take with every single shot. Which is arguably the most useful, but at 300 bullets, that takes up almost the entire game to save up to unless you actively grind for it. But for base in specific, the treble boost returns, where treble will just kind of show up and turn into an adapter for base to fly for a limited time. That's 200 bolts. I would actually recommend saving up for that because it can be useful. I don't get it in this LP though because I'm prioritizing the energy balancer and all that in respect, just because base cyclone is more useful in the long run. There's the Super Buster, which doubles the power of your base shots, which are really good, because that makes him, you know, good at killing things, but it costs 300. There's the Hyper Buster, which allows base's buster shots to pass through walls. Not as useful, although I guess it would be more useful than Mega Man's shots doing that. And there's Reggae, where he just shows up and drops an item. It's actually one of the few games he's in actively. But now it's time for Bulletman, Week 2, the base Cyclone again. He will charge left and right across the screen, which actually causes a little bit of a shockwave effect when he hits the wall, which can pause you for a second. And then he fires some active shots at you that you can just jump over, and then he loops. You seeing why base Cyclone's so good? And for beating him, we do actually get another very handy weapon, the base Vulcan. You fire a Vulcan bullet forward, and it tracks onto enemies actively. What this tutorial doesn't exactly do a good job of showing you, though, is that it's really good at being rapid-fired. You can just mash the button and you will shoot it out like nothing else. Another good weapon, base Cyclone is still technically better for boss fights, but the base Vulcan can be used for a lot of just random trash mobs, no problem. And with that, we're on to now the final of the starting four Robot Masters, Stoveman. Otherwise known as Conro Man. A bit weird to have Aircon Man and Conro Man in the same game, but oh well. And notably, players of Mega Man ZX Advent who collect all the items might recognize this character because he shows up in one of the just menu items that you can get from doing one of the side quests. I think it's the comic book in particular. I really don't know why specifically ZX Advent mentioned this game like 3 or 4 different times. It's like the only time they actively reference the game overall, barring maybe some very sparse ones that are more so coincidence than anything, like Star Force 3 for instance. There is a character named Thermoman, if memory serves, maybe it was Star Force 1, either way. But that character's name in the Japanese version was Aircon Man, but that's probably more just them reusing the idea more so than it being a direct reference to the same character kind of deal. When Rockman/Mega Man X died, the gacha game all about celebrating the franchise as a whole and has characters from all the games and all the timelines and all that, still hasn't referenced this one, you know it's probably not in a good place in the hearts of Capcom. Although it does make me wonder if in the weird timeline where the Powered Up series continued because it sold well in the PSP, and we got like a Powered Up 2, 3 onwards, I wonder if when they got to Mega Man and Base, if they would have just included like a cheeky one-off joke stage that was like a summarization of this entire game. It would have been kind of funny. If anything, I would have just liked to see some of these characters in that art style, like Conro Man in particular, so man, would have just been funny in that Chibified look. His head would be so huge. Oh, also, there, right there, we actually got the Sniper Joes for this game, and they're pretty beefy. They're largely, I think, based off the... I think their names were Hammer Joes from Mega Man 3. But thankfully, like the ones from as early as Mega Man 2, you can just shoot at their toes and it's no problem. What is a problem is this mini-boss. This is, I think it's called the Knuckle, at least from what I remember researching on the knowledge base. It's a giant hand that just comes from below, crushes part of the platform, and tries to do damage to you. But you might notice, there's spikes on the ground. And if you run on a platform, there's not really much you can stand on, and you're dead. Yeah, I believe that boss fight is basically just on a timer, because I don't think you can just stand on the far left or right little blocks at the side if it gets to that point. So do as much damage as you can as fast as you can. Mega Man has an easier time because you can at least use the charge shot there. But as base, you probably should bring in a weapon by coming to the stage at least second. Base Cyclone's good for that, so is the base Vulcan if memory serves, but I'm saving the base Vulcan because it's the weakness of Stoveman. I know I keep kind of swapping between even the names for the weapons between English and Japanese, between base Cyclone and Forte Cyclone and all that. Yeah, that's just because I'm used to calling them one thing, but for the purposes of this LP, I'm calling them the other. My brain's a little swapped over is what it comes down to. Also, if memory serves, from remember researching in the knowledge base, before doing this LP. Apparently, Stoveman is like Hitoshi Ariga's favorite obscure robot master out of like all the ones that are like exclusive to handheld games and all that. And you know what? He is doofy looking, I like him. And in particular, by the way, Stoveman's name in Japanese, Conroman, is in reference to a very specific type of portable grill used in Japan that runs on Japanese charcoal, which apparently burns hotter than normal charcoal for some reason or another. This is easily the most Japanese Mega Man game, if you can't tell, barring, of course, the setup of the society in Mega Man Battle Network and Star Force. Oh, also, seeing it on screen, I should note this. While yes, Base can dash under some spikes in the game, it really depends on the height of the corridor you're dashing under. For instance, the spikes on that last screen, Base can't get under those. Mega Man can with his slide, Base can't dash that low. There are some power-ups in a stage that are exclusive to either Base or Mega Man based on whether or not you need the double jump or the slide to get to. So they at least try to give the characters each their own little perks in some stages, even though overall, ultimately, Mega Man is the better character to play this game as compared to Base. With that said, it's time for Stoveman, who's kind of annoying in that you can't damage him face on. When he's on the ground, he's completely invincible. You can only damage him when he's moving by jumping or dashing. The first attack he's going to do is send some fire up in the air, which then rains down at semi-random, and then he fires some more in a bit of a wall that comes back and forth towards him, sort of like Flame Man's Flame Wall. Then he flies up in the air, fires 5 shots downwards, and then repeats on the other side. As you can see, Base Vulcan, when he's in the air, very effective at taking him out. And for beating him, we get, not for nothing, a really good shield-type weapon. We're gonna get the Flame Mixer here. While you're holding the button, you have a completely invincible shield that will just damage enemies per frame, basically. And when you let go of the button, it flies off in the direction you're holding. Kind of a good one, not gonna lie. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're gonna go take care of the rest of the Robot Masters if memory serves. See you guys then.